She sold her late father's land to send him to America. She borrowed money she could not repay. She worked endless shifts, skipped meals, and prayed every night that he would keep his promise to come back for her first. 3 years later, Marco Villanueva returned to the Philippines, but not for Elena Reyes. He came back to marry someone else in a wedding she was never invited to. What happened next will give you complete justice. Elena Reyes was 19 years old when she made the decision that would destroy her life and eventually save it completely. She lived with her mother Rosita in a small wooden house in a quiet Philippine province surrounded by rice fields. Her father had died when she was only 7 years old. On his deathbed, he had left her one precious thing, a small piece of land near their village he had saved for her future. Anik, her father had whispered with his final breath, "This land is your future. Never sell it." Elena had held that promise inside her heart for 12 years like a sacred prayer. Her mother Rosita worked as a seamstress in their small barangay. Elena worked extra shifts at the local roadside eatery. They survived on small meals, big faith, and the quiet hope that one day Elena's future would unfold exactly the way her father had imagined. When Elena turned 19, she met Marco Villanueva at a town fiesta on a warm summer evening. Marco was 21 years old, tall, charming, with restless ambition burning behind his eyes. He came from a family even poorer than hers. He talked endlessly about dreams of going to America. He talked about building wealth, building a life that would honor everyone who had ever doubted him. Elena listened carefully and slowly fell in love with all of it. For 2 years, Elena and Marco survived on hope more than money. They walked instead of taking the jeepney. They shared single meals between them. They held hands quietly by the river on evenings when neither of them could afford a real date. Marco often whispered the same dream into her ear over and over. America would change everything for both of them. He just needed money for the visa, the flight, and the first months of survival. Elena believed him without hesitation. She worked extra hours at the roadside eatery until her feet ached through the night. She borrowed money from neighbours she had no real way of repaying. She took loans from local lenders charging cruel interest rates that grew faster than she could manage. But no matter how hard she worked or how carefully she saved, it was never quite enough money to send him abroad the way his dream required. One quiet evening, Elena stood alone at her father's grave for 3 full hours beneath the orange dying sunset. She begged him for forgiveness in whispered Filipino prayers broken by her sobs. She told him she would buy the land back one day with her own hands and her own money. She told him this was the only way forward she could see. The next morning, she sold her father's land for half of its value. She placed every single peso on her small wooden kitchen table the following afternoon. Marco stared at the money for a long moment before he cried with gratitude. He held her face between his trembling hands and made the most important promise of his entire life directly to her. "When I succeed in America," he whispered firmly, "I will come back for you first. Always you first." Elena believed every single word without any doubt at all. For the first month after Marco arrived in America, he called Elena every single night without fail. He told her about the cold weather, the strange food, the loneliness of New York City. He told her how much he missed her voice and her cooking. By the second month, the calls came every other day instead. By the 6th month, only on Sundays. By the end of the first year, the silence began slowly creeping between them. What Elena did not know was that Marco had been hired into the corporate world of Vivian Sinclair, a rising executive working inside one of the many subsidiary companies under the vast Ashford empire. Vivian noticed Marco from the very first day he walked into her office building. She noticed his hunger, his restless ambition, his willingness to do anything to climb higher. She brought him slowly and deliberately into her exclusive, privileged world without hesitation. Vivian bought Marco expensive Italian suits he could never have afforded on his own salary. She introduced him to important business contacts across the industry. She opened career doors that honest work alone would never have unlocked for him. And slowly, day by day, Marco began hiding Elena's existence from his new American life. When Vivian asked if he was seeing anyone back home, he said no without flinching. He went to her family dinners without a second thought. By the end of the second year, Marco's calls stopped altogether. Elena messaged him constantly. Voicemails, letters, emails, anything just to hear his voice again. His replies grew shorter and further apart until eventually they stopped entirely. Elena told herself he was simply busy building their shared dream. She kept working 2 jobs to slowly repay her debts. She kept praying for him every single Sunday at their small village church, sitting alone in the same wooden pew. 3 years after Marco left the Philippines, Elena received the worst news of her life from her neighbour, Aling Carmen. Marco had returned to the Philippines 2 weeks earlier without a single word to Elena. He had not visited her, he had not called once, he had come back with Vivian Sinclair to introduce his American fiancée to his family. They had married in a luxurious seaside ceremony in Cebu just the week before Aling Carmen found out. Elena did not believe Aling Carmen at first. The older woman quietly opened her phone and showed Elena the Facebook wedding photographs. Marco in a white linen suit, Vivian in a designer dress that cost more than Elena's entire house, both of them smiling on a beach with the ocean glittering behind them. Elena's hands began trembling. She walked home that afternoon without speaking a single word and locked herself inside her small bedroom for 3 full days. She did not eat. She did not speak to anyone at all. She did not cry until the 4th day when Rosita gently knocked on her bedroom door and held her without saying anything until Elena could breathe normally again. 2 months later, more news arrived from another neighbour. Vivian had given birth to a healthy baby boy in America. Elena quickly understood that Vivian had already been carrying Marco's child when he went completely silent on her. Marco now had an entirely new life. A wealthy wife, a newborn son, a corporate career built on money Elena had bled to give him. She was a forgotten chapter he had quietly closed. That night, Elena stood on her small wooden balcony, looking out at the dark provincial street, the weight of everything she had lost pressed down on her chest like something physical. Then she heard Rosita's soft breathing from the next room, and something inside her quietly refused to break. Instead, something inside Elena Reyes hardened slowly into something purposeful and new. She made herself one promise, standing on that balcony in the dark. She would not disappear for a man who had so easily erased her. She would become a woman Marco Villanueva could never forget for the rest of his life. 1 year later, Elena applied through a Filipino caregiver placement agency for a position in New York City and packed her single, small suitcase to leave. She arrived in America with almost no money and no family waiting to receive her. She moved into a tiny shared apartment in New York City with 3 other Filipino immigrant women. She worked caregiving shifts during the days. She cleaned office buildings at night until her back ached through to the morning. She washed dishes at a small diner on her weekends. Some nights, she cried herself to sleep on her thin mattress, staring at the ceiling. On those nights, she called her mother Rosita on a borrowed phone. Rosita always answered, no matter what hour it was back in the Philippines. She never once asked Elena when she was coming home. She simply said, "Mahal kita, anak. Stay strong," and the call would end quietly. It was always enough to carry Elena through one more day. She kept working. She kept believing. She kept moving forward, one exhausted step at a time. One rainy Tuesday evening, Elena was walking home alone from her late cleaning shift. The streetlights were dim and slicked with rain. Ahead of her, outside the entrance of a luxury hotel, she saw an elderly woman being roughly harassed by 2 young men who were trying to forcefully grab her expensive purse. The woman was tiny and completely alone. There was no security guard visible, no driver, no one else on that dark, wet street but Elena. Elena did not stop to think for even 1 second. She ran toward them shouting in English and Tagalog. She called for hotel security at the top of her lungs. She placed herself physically between the elderly woman and the two men like a human shield and held her ground until both of them ran away into the rain. The elderly woman thanked Elena through grateful tears streaming down her wrinkled face. Elena never even asked her name. Elena simply walked home alone in the cold rain that night, completely soaked through her thin coat. The next morning, a sleek black car arrived at the small diner where Elena worked her weekend breakfast shifts. A driver in a dark suit stepped out and respectfully asked the manager for Elena Reyes by name. The elderly woman she had bravely protected on that rainy street turned out to be Margaret Ashford herself, the most powerful woman in American corporate finance. Margaret Ashford owned an empire worth billions of dollars, built entirely through her own decades of relentless, honest work. She did not offer Elena charity that morning. She offered her something far more rare and valuable: an opportunity to interview at her company. Elena had no college degree, no corporate experience, no connections of any kind. But Margaret had seen something in Elena that years of privilege could never manufacture and money could never buy anywhere: dignity. Elena started in the company mailroom on her very first day. 6 months later, she was promoted to assistant for a senior vice president. 1 year in, she was managing operations across multiple departments. There was a morning in her 14th month when a senior director laughed during a presentation she gave in the boardroom. Elena paused, looked directly at him, and said calmly she would be happy to explain the numbers again more slowly. The room went quiet. Margaret Ashford, sitting at the head of that boardroom table, smiled without looking up from her notes. She had been waiting for that moment. 2 years after joining the company, Elena Reyes was a respected corporate strategist, sitting across from billionaire executives who were old enough to be her grandfather. She wore tailored suits. She spoke softly and precisely. She made multi-million-dollar decisions without raising her voice once. The mailroom girl had become someone the boardroom feared. Meanwhile, Margaret had been quietly grooming her son, Julian Ashford, to eventually lead the family empire. Julian was 32 years old, observant, and deeply unlike the loud, wealthy men surrounding him. He arrived to every meeting 5 minutes early and sat quietly until everyone else settled. He carried a worn leather notebook he wrote in by hand instead of typing on a laptop. He listened far more than he spoke. He respected dignity above bloodlines or inherited money. Julian Ashford noticed Elena Reyes long before he ever spoke a single word directly to her. He noticed her because she did not look at him the way every other woman in the company did. She did not see his money or his name or his future inheritance. She simply saw him as another person doing a job. For the first time in his entire privileged life, Julian met a woman who needed absolutely nothing from him at all. Over the following year, Julian created small reasons to work directly alongside Elena on company projects. He listened carefully when she spoke during meetings and remembered details from their brief conversations weeks later. He never used his position or his name to pressure her into anything. He simply showed up consistently as a quiet and respectful man. For the first time in many painful years, Elena felt genuinely emotionally safe around another human being. She slowly opened her heart. Julian eventually told Elena he had fallen in love with her on a quiet rooftop garden above the city one evening. He said he wanted to build a real life with her, not because she needed him, but because he could not imagine his days without her steady presence beside him. Elena cried softly when he said those words. She had not realized how deeply she had needed someone to choose her without any conditions until that exact moment arrived. 3 years after Elena first joined the company, the Ashford Empire hosted its annual gala at the Grand Manhattan Ballroom. Hundreds of executives and investors gathered that evening. Elena walked in wearing a stunning, deep emerald gown beside Julian Ashford. The future CEO held her hand the entire evening without letting go once. Margaret Ashford stood proudly beside them both. If this story is moving you, drop Pinoy with the love emoji in the comments right now. On the opposite side of the ballroom, Marco Villanueva stood beside Vivian Sinclair. Marco was now a mid-level manager at one of the smaller Ashford subsidiaries. He had been invited because his department reported to one of Julian's main divisions. He looked across the crowded ballroom and saw Elena standing there beside Julian Ashford. His crystal champagne glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the polished marble floor. Heads turned briefly. Marco did not move at all. Elena. The girl from the small wooden house by the rice fields. The girl whose father's sacred land had quietly funded the beginning of the life he was now losing. She was standing tonight beside the most powerful man in the entire room, wearing an emerald gown like she had always belonged there. For the first time in his life, Marco Villanueva understood with absolute clarity exactly what he had thrown away without a second thought years ago. Vivian Sinclair noticed Marco's frozen expression beside her. She slowly turned and saw Elena across the ballroom. And for the first time in her privileged life, Vivian realized the simple provincial girl her husband had abandoned was not the weak, forgotten woman she had always assumed her to be. Elena was something else entirely. Something that money and status could not replicate. Vivian set her champagne glass down carefully on the nearest table and did not pick it up again. Later that night, Margaret Ashford quietly invited Elena into her private library. She poured them both small glasses of warm brandy by the fireplace. Then Margaret told Elena the truth she had kept carefully for years. She had known exactly who Elena was from the very beginning of their time together. After that rainy night, Margaret had hired investigators who traced Elena's history all the way back to a small, rural Philippine province and found everything waiting there. Margaret had discovered the father's lost land, Marco Villanueva, the cruel betrayal, the years Elena had carried alone in silence. She had also discovered that Marco himself worked inside her own corporate empire as a small subsidiary manager. Margaret had helped Elena not from charity, but because she had seen her own younger self looking back at her through Elena's steady, determined eyes. She had been waiting 3 years to tell her this truth by the fire. Within 1 year of that gala night, Vivian destroyed Marco in their bitter divorce. She had been quietly seeing someone else for years. Their son Liam barely recognised Marco as a father anymore. Marco was left with nothing but his mid-level position inside the Ashford Empire. Elena and Julian married 6 months later in a small private ceremony with Rosita flying in from the Philippines. 1 year after that, Elena gave birth to a healthy boy they named Mateo Ashford.